Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Circle Talks. Today we're talking about B2B influencer marketing. What is it? How do we define an influencer? How do you go about developing an influencer strategy? And most importantly, how do you measure the success of an influencer strategy? So, as always, we've got some amazing experts joining our panel today. And please ask them as many questions as you like in the chat function. But before we meet our panelists, I'd like to introduce you to the moderator of today's session. You might have seen her before. She was in one of our previous sessions in January. Yarmila Yu. She's the founder of strategic marketing consultancy, Unique Marketing, and an award-winning, globally ranked top 100 CMO and chartered marketeer with over 25 years experience in marketing. So welcome, Yarmila, and welcome to the panelists. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jessica, and what a lovely welcome. It's great to be back with you all today. So my goodness, influencer marketing. Well, with influence comes huge responsibility. As marketing leaders in our businesses and as businesses and brands, we can be highly influential, and that's a huge responsibility. And we're living in interesting times, a time where trust is at an all-time low. Even the latest Edelman Trust Barometer of 2021, just out now, shows that trust has declined further. No surprise, we're all aware of the fake news that surrounds us all. But the report did show a glimmer of hope for those of us in business, and that's all of us on this meeting today. Because business remains the only trusted institution, we have to step in. The other major institutions we used to trust aren't trusted anymore. And that, combined with new technologies, given everyday people a far-reaching and loud voice, and importantly, influence, will trust the opinion of a complete stranger and buy a product they review and give 5 stars to. So the questions, I've got a bunch of questions for the panel today, but I'm really curious, are they potentially influencing and leading us more than the leaders in government, media, corporates and charities these days? In a way, I think they are our new leaders, because leaders need followers to lead, and followers follow because they're trusting, and we're putting our trust in these people. So as businesses, as brands, engaging with and leveraging those people, those influencers, poses us important questions. We have to protect our brands. We have to protect our reputation. Are we handing our brands over to externals? What are the risks with all of that? And how can they stay credible and authentic to our brand value, mission, vision, values? So without any further ado, let's dive in and get up close and personal with influencer marketing. We've got the panel should be coming on stage. We've got Kathy from Cook Optics, Ollie from The Fifth, and Charlotte from 7/6. Before we dive into the questions, and I've got a huge bunch so that you can get great value from today's session, let's just go around the virtual room, do a quick intro, and let the folks on this meeting know who you are and what your background is. So if we could please start with Kathy, and then go to Charlotte, and then to Ollie. So Kathy.
Evening all. Afternoon. I'm Catherine Crawley. I'm the Director of Global Marketing for Cook Optics, who I'd never heard of when I got approached to work on their social media account, but they are a cinema lens company in Leicester in the Midlands who've been making photographic and cinema lenses since the late 1890s. A wonderful craft business. They have made lenses for Arctic exhibitions, royal weddings, hanging lenses off the back of biplanes during World War II. Famous American cinematographer Ansel Adams took all their historic pictures in Yosemite Park in the mid-50s. And for TV and film, from Charlie Chaplin through to, I've got my list here because I forget them all, Citizen Kane, Spartacus, Wizard of Oz, Sound of Music, Harry Potter, Return of the Jedi, Star is Born in recent years, Birds of Prey, the latest Harley Quinn movie, and TV from The Crown to Breaking Bad to Hunters to Watchmen and lots of things you might see on your Netflix TV. So I'm very lucky to work for this brand, and they have an incredible fan base and user base all over the world within cinematographers and camera department. So that's me, and I'm lucky to be working for this brand, and my jamminess will come through in this.
Fabulous. Well, we're lucky to have a client side expert on influencer marketing with us today. So Charlotte, over to you next.
Hello, my name is Charlotte Williams. I'm the founder of 76 Agency. We are an influencer marketing agency based in London, and we focus on diversity and inclusion. We both manage talent and create influencer campaigns alongside educating influencers and all things influencer marketing, as well as brands. So we do kind of all things encompassing influencers. Yeah, that's what we do. I won't list everything, but that's exactly what we do.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but not least, Ollie.
Hello everyone, I'm Ollie Lewis. I'm the founder and managing director of The Fifth. Much like Charlotte, I guess, we're a full service creative influencer marketing agency and talent agency. So two distinct divisions within the business, but with a real emphasis, particularly on the client side, on creativity, strategy, storytelling, and really representing cultural voices. And I think that's quite important as a differentiator really for the type of talent that we want to work with. And we firmly believe in influencer marketing being a professional marketing standard and driving that throughout the industry. So clients of ours include the likes of Disney and Tag Heuer, Kendo, and on the B2B side, the likes of Dell and Square. And on the talent side, very similarly, we really celebrate, as I said, individualism and creativity. And I think really important as we talk about how influence marketing is evolving, those that are really using their influence for positive force and for good. And we really want to drive that and empower our talent to be responsible with their influence. So we've got about 37 content creators and influencers and activists, journalists that we represent currently. And that's who we are.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. So let's get started with some basics. One question, and I'd like to pose it to all of you each in turn. So if you could spend maybe say 60 seconds on what, if this is at all possible, what is influencer marketing and why should it be part of a brand's marketing plan? So if we go to you, Kathy, first.
Our customers are cinematographers, camera operators. They're technical, practical, but they're also very emotional. So they're driven by desire and aspirations and things like that. So what their peers are using, what their colleagues are using, what their mentors are using, what their heroes are using is very important to them.
Fabulous. Charlotte.
So influencer marketing for me is a very important part of the marketing mix. It's a newer type of marketing in a sense, but essentially it has been around forever, but just in slightly different ways. It's a type of marketing that has evolved from the celebrity days to mixed now with models, celebrities, and then only kind of at home trusted friends who have become influencers. It's I think it's an understated industry. It's an industry that has a prediction of, what is it now, 20 billion or something for 2022. And it's a massively growing market. So it's something that I think every brand needs to figure out how to do, but within their own remit.
Wonderful. And Ollie, for you, what is influencer marketing and why should it be part of a brand's plan?
Very good question. I think what's important here is in influencer marketing is evolving so quickly. I think it's important actually to take stock and try and just distill it to its core. And for me, that is putting talent and people of influence at the heart of your advertising, the heart of your comms or your content strategy. But I think importantly, beyond just using them as talent or using and representing their brand, it's trusting them with your brand to communicate your values and your product to both their audience but also yours. So in a sense, it's about representing your brand to a shared audience, and that could be anybody, right? That's people of influence for me is everyone from community leaders, experts in their field, your existing brand advocates, all the way to mainstream talent, sports, artists, musicians. So for me, it's very much the evolution of content marketing, and very much for me fits within a brand storytelling space. So why very quickly use influence marketing? Because it works, and it's always a bold statement, but it works entirely throughout the funnel. It's absolutely can drive from brand impact and awareness through consideration to conversion, depending on the type of talent, the way you activate, the breadth of platforms that you want to use. So it's a really agile and I think a thoroughly interesting marketing channel in its own right. And I think there's a lot of press around its trustworthiness and its immaturity, but I think the important thing to state is that it's no longer the Wild West. It is in some quarters, but it is very much, it can be transparent, it is professional, and it can be measured, and I think that's critical. So in summary, really, I think the influencer marketing, you can reach any audience, you can enter communities where potentially, you know, brands might not have a right to enter on their own, and I think that's what's so powerful about it. You know, this idea that you can enter a conversation. For a brand, you could be forcing yourself into a community where you're not welcome. Through influencer marketing, through content creators and voices, you can absolutely connect to that conversation in an authentic and credible way. And now we can measure it. I think it's certainly, as Charlotte says, a really important part of the mix.
Fabulous. Right. So we're all set on what it is, and that we're already being sold as to that we should be doing it. So staying with you, Ollie, for a moment. You've mentioned that it's evolving, but is it really that new, or has it been around a while? And in some ways, have we been doing it for quite some time, but on a semi-professional basis? And how do we realise we maybe have been doing it, and we just need to up our game and sort of almost go pro and get better results from it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, word of mouth advertising is as old as marketing, right? And in particular, it evolved into ambassadorialships. You know, we've been using celebrity and talent to endorse products for a very long time, certainly in our above the line strategy. So there's nothing particularly new in that. But as the thing I was saying just earlier, is that it's not just about borrowing their status or using their brand, it's about using their voice and their talent. So the difference and the nuance to how it's evolving is and in particular with the influencers, you know, social influencers and digital first influencers, they're incredible content creators. So actually it's the convergence of creativity and media. You've got them, you know, creating and almost disintermediating the production and creative agency space and creating assets for you to use within your own strategy. So I think it's certainly not new, but it's evolving. And if you think of influencers now as very much social publishers in their own right, very much brands in their own right, and entrepreneurial in their own right, they are driving change. As you said in your intro, you know, they're very much as influential now as the politicians. If you only have to look at Marcus Rashford over the last few months to see someone that's used their platform and their voice to make a difference. And I think that's very much the way the space is moving. So I think the way to up your game in this is probably to think of it less in a PR space and more in a true marketing sense, and therefore, you know, paying your talent in particular, because then there's a contract in place and a contract and a value exchange. If you're paying your talent, you get the benefits of set deliverables and KPIs. You get the benefits of having access to their data so you can actually measure. And I think when you think of it in those terms, it's less of it being quite sort of one and done executional. You know, here's a product, please could you talk about it? Which is, you know, influencer marketing perhaps 1.0 and in a PR world, and more about longer term partnerships where you build affinity between their audience and your brand over a much longer period of time. So upping your game for me in summary really is treat it like a paid marketing channel and invest in it as you would a media partnership, and you'll start to see the rewards almost immediately.
Excellent, great, some good guidance there. Charlotte, moving to you, given that you have a network of influencers as part of your portfolio, can you advise what makes someone an influencer? You know, who should be on our radar as potential influencers or brand ambassadors? And in fact, are those two things separate, or are they the same thing? How can you even think about becoming an influencer? I mean, did Marcus Rashford wake up one morning and think, "Oh, hey, I'm going to become an influencer"? So, what does it all mean to be an influencer?
I personally believe, and I think a lot of us in the industry say the same, is that the word influencer, the term, it's a generic term. So it just encompasses anyone who uses their influence with brands or to influence an audience into purchasing a product or a service or to do something. So there's influencers who have been influencing forever, but maybe not put any kind of monetary value towards it. And there are influencers who are paid to do so. And I think it's just figuring out as a brand, figuring out what it is that you are looking for from said influencer. So what ambassadorships are a form of influence marketing in the sense that using someone's influence and leveraging their audience to showcase your product, your service, whatever that might be. So it's definitely part of the influencer mix. And I always say that an ambassadorship is actually like the goal for influencers, because it's great to have partnerships, you know, a deal here, a deal there, but what you actually want is a long-term partnership that not only benefits the influencer financially, but also benefits both of them, brand and influencer, in the sense that the influencer's audience feels a sense of, they understand that the influencer actually does like this product or this service. They actually do use it. It's long-term. It's not just they're being paid that one time to talk about it. And then flip that to the brand. It's showcasing that that person is invested in the company and is with them long term. So I think brand partnerships can be many things. It can be a one post opportunity. It could be on any platform, be that Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, TV, whatever that might be. Influencer marketing crosses all of that. Celebrities are a form of influencer. They fall into that generic term, but then we have, you know, the nano influencer, the macro celebrity. So nano being, if we use it in terms of following, and let's use Instagram as an example. So for nano influencer, you say that they would have maybe under 1,000 followers, depending on who you ask, but under 1,000 followers on Instagram. And then we'd go over to the micro, who'd have over 1,000, or maybe sometimes 10,000, depending on who you speak to, because there are slightly different terms for different people and agencies. And then as we get to the hundreds of thousands, we get to the macro, and then when we get into the millions, we're probably looking at celebrities. And then knowing within those categories and within those brackets what each of those people can bring to a marketing campaign. So if you're using influencer marketing within your marketing mix and you're involving influencers, we always say to have a nice, if it's a bigger campaign, have a mixture. Because what a nano influencer who has maybe 500 followers or 1,000 followers is going to offer is very different to someone who's going to have, you know, millions of followers and have a much bigger reach. But they both have their place in a campaign. It's just figuring out what that is for your brand or product.
Wow, goodness, so many different levels of influence there, and you didn't even mention royalty in the sense of HRH. So moving on to a slightly different angle on this. Moving to you, Kathy. I mean, typically, those of us in marketing, we have to go cap in hand for budget, and we have to plot the metrics so that we can say, yeah, we're going to measure this and we can show return. How would you, given that you're client side, how would you justify budget, or can you do influencer marketing on a shoestring budget? Because listening to Ollie and Charlotte thinking about agency involvement, straight away you're thinking, oh, yeah, dollar signs, and thinking about maybe the macro influencers and the bigger celebrities, you know, that's going to be big bucks. But can people do this kind of thing on a shoestring?
The agencies here won't want me to say, yeah, of course you can.
You can.
No. Of course you can.
No.
Only 7 years.
Only to a point. Only to a point. So when I started Cook 4 years ago, there was no marketing budget at all. There was no marketing department. There was no social media. There was no nothing. So in 4 years, we now have a YouTube channel with over 100,000 subscribers, which is very, very niche for cinematography and filmmaking. We interview well-known DOPs all over the world. So that's it's called Cook Optics TV. So the clue's in the name, but we actually never talk about Cook lenses. We interview our heroes and talk about their productions, their inspiration, and that kind of thing. So we never actually talk about our products, which is why we can say it's an educational channel that we sponsor. So the only association is the name. So we did that. And then I just built up all the social channels from nothing. So that's 4 years, going to almost 100,000 on Instagram. I think we've got 220 across 4 channels. So that's a build. And I'm lucky that, famous cinematographers and YouTube influencers already like our products, already have discovered our products. But as I said to Ollie and Charlotte, it only goes so far. We've worked with Devon Supertramp, who he does some brilliant adrenaline and parkour and that kind of really funky stuff. And he also does title sequences for historical dramas. He did one about knights, where all the knights were in a castle and they were doing all these mad parkour stunts and things. And I met Devon at NAB show. We said, can we trade? And we lent him a set of lenses that would have cost him a few £1,000s to rent. So there was some trade value, and he used the lenses and made it behind the scenes and gave us the content. But Devon wouldn't do that again for us. It's a one-time off deal. We had a lovely exchange of product for resources, but I can't keep tapping him up. He won't do it again with his audience of Devon's audience, 6.1 million on YouTube alone. So he won't do that again with that budget.
Wow. So Ollie's taking a different tack now. Influencer marketing. And on today, we've probably got a mix of B2C and B2B brands. And immediately people think influencer marketing, it must be just a B2C thing. Can B2B get in on the act too? Are there any differences that you need to consider between consumer and business? And how do you decide that it's the right thing for your brand to, go down the path of influencer marketing?
Yeah, well, look, 100%. I think, and there are nuances which we can touch on. But I think if you only have to look at the last year to see just how much there's been a return to expertise, particularly across social, right? I mean, if you look across lockdown and through the year that we've had globally, the demand for trusted sources of information and education, whether that's through movements or through COVID around health or fitness tips, or this was a thirst for knowledge. And you said it actually in your intro. There's been a trust decline in certain areas of media, and I certainly think that within certainly millennials and Gen Z generations, they are trusting their peers, they're trusting their community guardians, those that they follow on social, far more than they are certainly politicians, but actually mainstream media. And there's that is something I'm sure will balance out over time, but it absolutely, that convergence of expertise and influence, and as you said, engaged audiences, is really a fertile ground for B2B marketing. And as it has been for B2C. I looked at some recent surveys to throw a few stats into a panel, which I think is always important. So recently, said in one of the B2B surveys, said that 96% state, and there's three here, that B2B vendors could improve the quality of their content by curbing direct sales speak within their content strategy. 97%, even higher, place a high emphasis on trustworthiness of the source, and 95% prefer a credible content from industry influencers and hence experts. And then if you combine that with generational data, 72% of B2B buyers use social media to research a purchase. 53% of business buyers rely on peer recommendations when running. But this is certainly a further ground. We're finding a lot of business, tech and finance brands being really experimental in the space. And the reason is because you can bring to life those human experiences and stories. You can find those business experts, those entrepreneurs, even those lifestyle creators that themselves are developing their own businesses and their own brands. They're going through incredible business learnings and having to adapt technologies and business tech, for example, is a big area here. And they've got stories to tell. They're relatable. They're super interesting. And if you as a business looking to influence other like-minded businesses, small entrepreneurs, particularly in the SME market, it's an incredible opportunity to bring those stories to life. But where it's different, I think, to B2C is that I think there's a real opportunity for longer form content. Like I said, personal experiences and stories. So episodic docu-style content in video content works extremely well. But because there's a real need for depth. Mm-hmm. And product understanding. Effectively they're trying to educate their audiences on features at this point and how it can change their business life. So there's a real need for educating the talent and ensuring therefore maybe that they're already advocates of your brand. And I think the main point, I think we've touched on a few times, there's much longer campaign horizons. Don't expect results overnight. really invest in the partnership, invest in much longer term ambassadorial programs, and look for a much broader sphere of talent. Because, and by that I mean, really, you don't have to rely on those that have true social strength within their channels. One of the things that I think is starting to grow, particularly in influencer marketing, is paid media strategies and thinking about influencer marketing across channels. If you can find the right expert and the right advocate for your brand, who is already an existing advocate potentially, then absolutely amplify them and use paid media to create scale or to target your strategy. But fundamentally, it's the same as B2C. You identify the right talent, the right ambassador, and the right values, those that have a story to tell, who have an engaged audience that mirrors your own, and you create a compelling strategy to execute on it. And I think it's really exciting. And look, from our perspective, it's growing hugely. There's far more brands approaching us around B2B to work in this space than there were, say, 6 months ago.
I love those stats. In fact, I've been saying to our clients for some time, there's nothing that sells more than a customer case study, a customer testimonial. And we know for quite some time that video is a top performing asset. And if you can combine those two things together, a video testimonial, there we go. It doesn't get more difficult than that. You're onto something, really rather special. And having customers that actually become those advocates, that you touched on that word of advocates, is phenomenal. I think and also speaking earlier about the pandemic, we've not been able to necessarily get up close and personal with all the products or services that we'd want to purchase. So being able to hear from someone that's used the products or services that can actually say, well, I've used it, we've done this with it, these have been the outcomes, getting that across. So yes, I'll be stealing, she says, borrowing those stats from you, because it's incumbent on all of us actually to sell language less, but to focus more around the outcomes of what we're selling, what that delivers to clients. So that's fantastic. So Charlotte, for a B2B influencer, how do you see that differing from, say, a B2C influencer? You might see the traditional ones on YouTube, say working with maybe beauty brands or fashion. Have you got anything else to add to what Ollie's touched on there?
I think with influencer marketing in general, you have to be really creative. And I think the best campaigns always are, the best ideas always come from something really basic that you've just kind of amplified in a creative way. So I find the B2B side quite interesting because I know so many people, let's use B2B marketing as an example, selling marketing services and marketing products. I know so many people who are evangelists naturally of certain products, and they go on to use them and they talk about them all day, every day. But then at the same time, there's people who you can pay to do that as well. I'm going to use myself as an example just because I am an influencer, and I have worked with, I want to know, I can't remember if this came through, Ollie, your company actually, but I did a campaign with Starling Bank. I think this may have came through you. So I am an agency owner, I am a business person, but I'm an influencer on the side. Yeah. So they came to me as a business owner to talk about how I use the bank and my business purposes. And I thought it was a great opportunity because I love the bank, it aligns with all of my values, female founder, very ethical in terms of everything they do, links to my business and to my ethics and morals. And the campaign went really well, and looking at the other people they worked with, it was a very similar realm in that they may have been traditional influencers, but also business owners or business owners. So I feel like you can find influencers for your campaigns in so many different places, but again, creativity in the sense that I wasn't traditionally a kind of B2B focused influencer. I very much was consumer products, but the companies did their research, the agency did their research and saw that I did talk about the fact I had a business, and that really sat nicely with my audience. And I still get I got a message yesterday that I screenshotted to say because I was talking about Starling Bank again just as an evangelist, not even now as a paid partner. And I said something about them on my Instagram, and a girl said, I got my bank, I set up my banking because of you, because of how you just explained it. And I just explained it in my layman's terms, nothing like too jargony, but that's what my audience needed. And I actually know so many people that have the bank account because of that. And I think that's a great example in the fact that you have to do your research. It's not just finding insert in B2B influencer, stick them here. It's finding how that influencer can work with you. They might not be specifically around, let's say on the camera side with Kathy, they might be an influencer who actually doesn't necessarily talk too much about photography or about lenses, but actually their content's amazing and no one's really ever asked them how they create it. And then actually they use the most incredible, videography equipment. And it turns out it might be, I don't know, but it might be a Cook Optics lens. And they could do a behind the scenes campaign on what it takes to create some content. And I think that's where the imagination comes from. That's where the creativity plays a role, because you really have to figure out what will the audience actually get from this. You can't just, nowadays, put a product in front of anyone and say, this is great, you should buy it. There has to be, much like Ollie says with the whole business he's created, it, there has to be a story told. There has to be something that people can actually get from it and not only want to buy from it, buy from that product or service, but they want to live the experience, they want to be in it. And that's where influence marketing comes in.
That's absolutely fantastic, and I'm seeing there's more benefits than I'd previously imagined, because being able to not have that brand speak, and we're all guilty of being too in the weeds of the particular brand and the products and the language and terminology, but to bring the humanity back and to have the everyday regular person that's using that product, that service, to put it into English, into plain English, as to why they were doing that is great. I mean, whilst there are risks, yes, of handing your brand to somebody else to talk about it, they've also got the ideal opportunity to actually cut through and really grab someone's attention, because it's going to resonate, because they're going to talk about what matters to the individual. And I think probably we have been becoming a bit more robotic as technology's taken over our lives in the way that we message. So I think that's a real added benefit there. Kathy, with your experience, and that's phenomenal growth you've seen at Cook.
Can I jump in and talk about a couple of things the guys talked about first? Because I love that Ollie was talking about authenticity, because the match, the more authentic that is, the better it is for everyone. I talk about collaborations and win-wins and how I'm jammy and I've got all these kind of all real deals, because like people who've actually I've known have used the lenses, they welcome an approach from a brand, and you can work on some nice win-win collaborations because there's genuine authenticity there in a match, and build on that through having experts involved as you get more expectations from that match and time involved from the person. You can expect some favors if a small amount of time and effort's involved, but the more time and effort that's involved and the bigger their audience, the more they're going to expect some reward for that. But also I was waving my Starling Bank thing.
I could see it.
Only because my boyfriend influenced me to get a Starling Bank, and their marketing is so beautiful. It comes in a really weighted, heavy card that's embossed, and it's a beautiful bank experience. It's a wonderful bit of marketing, and so if your first experience is an influence and then a beautiful piece of print marketing, you go, oh, and I get free banking in Europe, unlike the bank I'm currently with. So yeah, there you go, Starling Self, everyone. What was the question?
I love that. You're hitting on to another one, which is probably a topic that maybe the marketing leaders.
Can I talk about KSI at this point? Let me get my KSI story in. KSI is the brother of Comedy Shorts Gamer. You guys know those two, don't you? JJ and Deji, who are two South London kids. Done so good, unbelievably good. I'm not sure how big Comedy Shorts Gamer. They started off being teenagers talking to teenagers, and now they're 20-something-year-old millionaires. unbelievable income. I have no idea what they're on. KSI just did a cover with, who did he? Craig David. He did a single with Craig David. He's got like 9.1 million now. But KSI had a budget of 50 grand for a 5-minute diss video against Logan Paul, because they were always like fighting, you know, because that's how they drive audience to each other. They make more money having fights than they do ignoring. So he did a 50 grand diss video for Logan Paul with a song. He decided to set it in a huge mansion house with a horror theme and have all the like crazy effects and cameras and rigs and go mental. And he had our latest S7 full frame lenses and top of the range cameras, top of the range lights, rigs, huge, incredible crew, really experienced. And that's a South London kid who didn't go to film school, that can just lob down 50 grand, have the best gear and the best people in the game. And yeah, I dined on the fact that KSI chose Cook S7 for his diss video against Logan Paul. But that was just me piggybacking, really. You know, I can't afford him, fundamentally, and his influence. I'm just cheeky, and I found out that it was happening. So you just take advantage of the fact you found out, and you can make the most of it.
That's great. That's great. And like that, yeah.
That's the creativity which Charlotte was talking about. You know, you have to sort of think on your feet and be creative. I have to stop you all just at this moment for one brief service announcement. We have mentioned Starling Bank, but we are not sponsored by Starling Bank. No one here is receiving commissions from Starling Bank, and other brands are available. So I just feel that I have to.
I think that's actually a legal thing with influencers now. If you are being paid for your influence, you actually have to declare it.
Yes,
you certainly do on social. I think just jumping on that point though, and Charlotte's story earlier, because I wanted to jump in because I think it's Charlotte's the perfect example of what's happening here. Influencers are effectively the new entrepreneurs, and they are in their own right business leaders. And look at Charlotte, influencer, business owner, business leader, influencing other business decisions. And I think there's nothing more pertinent than that to this conversation, because that's what B2B is, and that's why, you know, you shouldn't just look at experts in fields or business leaders we need to redefine the term influencer entirely, I think. So I think, you know, but Charlotte also made the point, you know, so finding that right match and identifying, it may not come in the most obvious place. And I think that's the point. So there's a real art and there's a real science to identifying the right ambassador, for your campaign or for your brand. I guess that's the part. Well, maybe that's my pitch for agencies. That's the part that's the part agencies play, you know. And I think because it's very high resource, it's a, you know, incredible amount of research that goes into it.
That you kind of read my mind there, because I was about to ask you, Ollie. Once we've decided that we need an influencer campaign, because you've all done a brilliant job so far of selling us on, we need an influencer campaign. You know, where do we start? You know, do we start with the influencer, or at what stage do we think about who the influencer should be to bring into the campaign? And how do you find that fit for the business and build the strategy? Or do you start with thinking around that marketing strategy first and then bringing in those pieces? And using the example of the physical in the digital era, which is one of my pet subjects, I mean, that's beautiful, where you actually have the integrated campaign. You've got physical, analog, and you've got the digital sort of campaign going on.
I think it's a great question, and it's one we get asked a huge amount, and one we've thought about a lot, because you will find that our clients, you know, and brands that approach us have a very clear idea coming into the conversation, the type of talent, or even specifically the talent they want to work with. And it's often unfounded, and there's quite a lot of work to do to unpick why. But some of it's just gut feeling, right? And they know their brands, and I can understand that. What we try to do is reset the whole conversation. Is start with a strategy. You know, you start with a strategy like as you would with any media planning or creative planning. You know, what are you trying to achieve? Who are you trying to reach? What's the primary objective? It's pretty obvious, really. But ultimately, if you get your strategy right, what you'll tip out of that is a talent archetype that you want to cast against. And bear in mind also that it's very easy to come in with a preconceived notion of who you want to work with, or specific names, but you'll often need 5 times as many validated talent on your shortlist for every one that you might be able to contract, and maybe even higher. If you think about availability, you think about, so timing is key, competition clauses, appetite to even work with you, do the values align? I think what's misunderstood, or perhaps but maybe it's an evolution of the space, is talent are far more savvy now as to their own brand and therefore who they want to work with. It is an audition on both sides, and they're not willing to jeopardize their own authenticity and credibility to just take the money anymore. And I know, bear in mind, there are some that still will, and I think that's where the culling will come over the next 12 to 18 months, because I think you find that, and particularly in a cancel culture world, they're even more concerned with the threats of getting this wrong. So there is that. They might not want to work with you. Then you've got to look into due diligence of their audiences, their data, their background. Are they safe for your brand? A huge amount of desk research goes into validating just their safety against your brand, and there's a lot of due diligence. So your best laid plans can be torn to bits. So you've got to have a watertight strategy, and therefore you can pivot the talent around that. And I find it too often where things go wrong is because you're trying to shoehorn the strategy into talent that certain brands are just adamant they want to work with, and you don't necessarily get the results. Whether the penetration of their audience, 95% of it could be in the US, but for example, and so before you know it, there's a huge amount of wastage even. So I think the other thing for us is, and on that point, is just don't be focused on reach. Be focused entirely on the relevance of the talent, on their engagement. You can always apply reach and targeting, but getting to the right talent first is it's got to be based on your strategy. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's ultimately where we start.
Okay, Charlotte, thinking around the influencers, and you being one, you can speak from your own experience as an influencer, as a registered influencer. How can people get the best out of the influencer that they choose to work with? Are there any tips on how to really work that relationship well?
Yeah, I would echo what Ollie just said, in the sense that you really have to, when you think about putting a campaign together, you really have to think about the whys. You really have to think about who's going to fit in with you, and vice versa. And I think to get the most out of an influencer, you need to really do your research on who they are, what makes them tick, what their audience responds to. We do a lot of one-to-ones with influencers on like the educational side, to ensure that they have their strategy down so that they can do the best that they can do, and then makes us better, because when we're selling them, we're actually doing their job properly. But what we find is that so many brands go to an influencer and say, we want you to do this. This is the brief. We want you to do this. And a lot of them will say, yes, okay. But we always say, sit back and look at what they've asked you to do. Does that feel like something you would actually do or say? If not, go back with your own creative concept and challenge them and say, I know this won't work for my platform, because my audience don't like videos, and actually they only really want to see photography, and that's what they're going to react to, and it's the caption that's going to get them in. Or my audience really, really react to video, and I know you want a feed post, just an image, but we really need to do video here. Or I'm really good on Twitter, and you haven't put that into the contract, so let's do this, but Twitter as well, because it will get you where you need to be. And I think that's a mix of making sure influencers are advocating for their own creativity, because we know that a lot of brands and agencies don't allow them to. But then flip that on its head, and I will say, make sure that you're allowing influencers to be creative and allow them to be part of the creative process. So we're finding a lot of agencies are now asking for creative mood boards, and when they bring an influencer on, to get them involved in the creative process, which is amazing. But then it's just getting to understand, is that something that they can actually do or need to do? Do you need to set up a call? Figuring out the best way and the most efficient way to work with influencers. So I think there's a lot that goes into it. And that's why, not to put agency side, but that's why agencies do exist. I worked in-house for so many years and launched an agency without even working for an agency. And I always was like, I'm never going to pay for an agency. They don't make, it's a waste of my money. I can do it all myself. But actually, when you are a small team and you have so much going on and you don't have time to sit and nurture these creatives in the way that they need to be nurtured to get the results, that's where agencies come in, or consultants or individuals separate to your team come in, because they can just do that for you. If you don't have the space, because it is quite a timely, sometimes we sit back and we think we spent a lot of time on this project, and it's not like billable hours, it's just time that the project takes, because you really need to like go back and forth with the content creator. And remember, we're working with creatives. It's not, so for a lot of the time, it's not a simple back and forth, like, here's the brief, go for it. It's, here's the brief, tell us what you think, respond to it, come back. They'll come back, and then, you know, they may have like a completely different idea of what needs to be done. And then you have to like reel them in, get them back, or you might actually like it and then have to change the campaign a little bit, go back to the client. There's a lot that comes through it. So my top tip, summing that up, is to really focus on the creativity and how you can get the most out of the person, not the most out of the campaign. So you have to completely eliminate the brand in this, in that you have chosen to do influencer marketing for this, and I'm sure that it's not the only part of this full campaign. So for this specific part of the campaign, the influencers are the important part. You've chosen them. What can they do to amplify it? It's not what can you do to like make it work. It's them.
It's trust, right? So ultimately, you're working with them because the audience trusts them. You need to trust your talent equally enough that they understand how to talk to their own audience. But I guess that's where like you said, Charlotte, as the agency in the middle, you're navigating both sides between making sure you get the brand's priorities, but also the talent who are producing the work that's going to deliver the best outcome.
Exactly.
Okay. At this point, I'm just going to check if we've got questions in the stream. Otherwise, I have got the and there's one popping up now. Right. So, what budget do you suggest an organisation needs to start an influencer program in the UK and the US? Can we just go? Who'd like to take that one?
I'm just going to say my general budget response is always, you know, how much do you have? Because the brands will come to me and say, you know, what, how much do I need for this? And it's like, well, what do you want? And I think that's the biggest thing. There's different levels of like whether you're a small business, a large business, you're a charity, you're a startup, there's so many different levels. We work with really, really small businesses and handhold them and do things in a slightly different way to how we would work with a larger business. But also what a larger business would be able to afford will get them more. So I think it's really important. I would never put a number behind it, because it's really important to figure out what is it that you want. How big do you want to go? What's your purpose? Are you looking for sales? You know, you can put $5,000 behind one influencer and get a 20 grand result. We have this. We work with lots of influencers on the fashion side, and that's like an everyday experience, and that's amazing. But then you could also put 10 grand behind multiple influencers and not get any really any sales uplift, but you might get a huge flow of traffic to your website, or a huge amount of views on the content that you wanted them to see, or people using certain codes to have access to things. So we need to figure out, in my opinion, it's what's the expectation? Are you looking for sales? Are you looking for traffic, kind of brand awareness, which is more of a PR metric, or are you looking for content? Because there's also influencers that won't really bring you anything in terms of sales, but can make you content that is amazing for you to use on your website, for you to use, on POS, for you to use like online, whatever that might be. So I always see that as three different ways. But budget, like only way as a much larger agency, but budget for me is always dependent on what you want the results to be.
Okay, no, I think that's really fair. In the last section, where we've got 8 minutes left of this, I've got a few questions, and I'm going to do just a quick fire round, because I would like to get all of your views on each of these questions. So we'll go around quite quickly. So first one up, thinking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Can you share an example of a favourite influencer campaign you've done or you've seen, and why you rate it? The good,
Yep.
the bad, the ugly.
Who's going?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Yes, Kathy.
I'll just be smug. I'll just be smug about Pixar. Basically, Toy Story 4 was reverse engineered on Cook lenses. We found that out after the film was in the cinema, but we've made an amazing relationship with Pixar and went up to San Francisco and got behind the scenes with all their DOPs and saw how they made things. So it's more of a partnership than an influencer. But the DOPs within Pixar are now our new influencers. So yeah, that was a huge discovery and a huge win.
Wonderful. And Charlotte, an example of a favourite campaign?
My favourite campaign, sorry if any clients are on here, but my favourite campaign to date has been, we did a campaign last year with Greenpeace, and it was their first time stepping into the influencer space without it being a celebrity. They've only ever worked with celebrities in the UK. So we introduced them to a group of influencers. Everything was organic. There was no like back-end activation and digital spend, because they wanted to understand what an organic campaign looks like, because they just didn't know. So we did a bit of an educational piece, and that was my favorite, because it really took us back to basics. It was a really raw campaign, really grainy, and it really showcased the power of an influencer, because the purpose was to get petition signups. So we didn't put any, we didn't amplify any of the posts. We just wanted to see naturally what these influencers brought to the table, and it worked really well. We actually did, I know this for a fact, we did use one of the Fifth Talent for this, Hughes McTaylor. He did really, and they loved her. Work with her again, I think. But yeah, I think that was my favorite, just because it was a real like back to what influencer marketing really is, and showcasing that to a brand that has never really thought about using it before.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And how about you, Ollie? What's a favourite that sticks?
My favourite, one that sticks in my mind, is something that was out last year by Network Rail, and it was a campaign again. So similar to Charlotte, right? You wouldn't expect necessarily, naturally, Network Rail would delve into influencer marketing, but it was a campaign called You versus Train, which was to try and raise awareness around railway safety. There was a huge, if you remember, the huge spike of kids running onto the railways. So a lot of rebellious rule breakers, and it was even more prevalent last year. Anyway, they worked with 4 really kind of traditional YouTubers, right, that have a very considered, authentic format. They talk to screen, they rant about passionate points like gaming and football. So they created this content that was very, very authentic to the way that they would normally talk to their audience. And then they were hit by a train in the middle of the video, and it was amazing. And it was just, you didn't see it coming. It completely shocked, but it was an amazing way to grab the attention of that generation, right? And in the results wise, it saw, I think, a 23% reduction in trespassing over that campaign period on the railway. It got an incredible amount of social uplift and virality. So it was really, I just think it was a great example of how influencers could use their influence for good, using their own formats and drive real results.
And Network Rail discovered the jump scare, didn't they, for the first time?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting that a couple of you have mentioned sort of cause-related campaigns rather than, you know, product or services. Think about the opposite now. Let's flip it. So think about the ugly. Has there been something that, probably none of your work, but something that you've seen that you thought, oh, just missed the mark, and they could have added this and it would have worked? Is there an example of a campaign that you've seen that maybe missed the mark and you would have guided them on how to do it better? Kathy, is there anything that...
Nothing coming to mind. I'm going to pass on this one.
Okay. Charlotte?
I don't have anything.
I'm going to be a bit more generic and kind of not give a brand name, but we find that there are lots of brands that jump on trends or jump on causes, such as plus size, advocacy for plus size fashion, or size inclusivity, or body positivity, but then they don't do the research into actually what that means. So we've seen brands in the past, and a few years ago, do body positivity campaigns, but not have anyone who's larger than a size 14 when plus size starts at 16. So that doesn't make any sense, and they've had lots of backlash. We've seen influencers being used for campaigns and then been dropped because they've said something on social media that doesn't align with the brand, but then it may be to do with racism, and then the Black Lives Matter movement resurgence happens. and then the brand is so on talking about racism, and then they realise that they shouldn't have dropped the person because they've just echoed exactly what they've posted on their social media, and they've had to backtrack. So I feel like a lot of the problems that we personally find with campaigns is that brands tend to try to jump on something because they think it's right, but then they don't have anyone in-house that actually understands what it is, and then they're just doing what they think is right, but it's not considered. So that whenever I've seen something go wrong, that is what's gone wrong, and you can tell it's just like the wrong person leading the activation.
And Ollie, anything that's in your mind is something?
I think that's a great point, and it would take a brave man to call out a client right now or a brand that's getting it wrong. So I would be more generic too. I think that the big thing, I think we've already touched on it here, is you've got to have trust in the content creation process. So where it goes wrong and where campaigns are so obviously fail is when you push too much of the brand's asset and messaging into the talent, and you effectively use them as a media channel. And if it sticks out, it's so raw and it sticks out from their feed, it doesn't look authentic, it's either not relevant to the way they would normally, like Charlotte said earlier, the way that they would normally speak, but also it's not their assets, it's not their creativity, their style, it's the wrong format. So you have to, if you're going to work with them, trust them and work with them, and follow the creative process. But I think there's very easy for this space to become commoditized and effectively become a race to the bottom and a low entry point media channel, and that's worrying for everybody. And I think we're all forcing it the other direction towards a really creative channel. So I think that's something to keep in mind, and that's where I see it fail.
Okay. And
I made a big mistake once, but I'm not sure we've got time for that. Do we have time for that?
You've got 20 seconds, Kathy.
No, I got in trouble with feminists, and yeah, it's too long a story.
Okay, save it for another time. So in the last few moments, 20 seconds on, if you had a crystal ball, what do you see happening with influencer marketing? What's a trend that's going to hit it? 20 seconds each. Kathy.
Can I go last?
Yes, you can go last. Charlotte.
Should have thought about this. So trends. For me, it's about, what I'm actually seeing as a trend is professionals. So influencers are, it's so generic in what it is, but brands and agencies are really looking to work with professionals, people who have a voice, people who are actively talking about something, so that all the campaigns that they're working on are really considered and really studied and really focused, because they're working with people who actually talk about these things in their real life, whether they are a professional in it or an advocate for certain projects. So for me, advocacy and professionalism and all things encompassing that is going to be what we're going to be seeing in the future.
Brilliant. And Ollie, 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Influencers jumping into the mainstream. You're going to see them coming across channels, into your out of home, onto TV, as is already starting to happen, but it will happen at pace. Then I think you watch the audio space, particularly in B2B. Look at the emergence of Twitter Spaces, Clubhouse, LinkedIn with their stories. There's going to be a flood of new B2B opportunities and more talent emerging as those formats develop. So I think that's the exciting space to watch. And I would just go audio.
Yes, there's that. And influencers on virtual events.
Oh, wonderful. And just snuck that in. So I now need to hand back to the studio, as they say. So thank you to the panel, and back to you, Jessica.
Oh, that was amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. Well, it sounds like a really exciting and kind of growing approach. So, and I got some really good nuggets there. So I hope the audience enjoyed it at home as well. Thank you again to all our panelists and to Jan Miller for moderating the session today. Our next event is on the 8th of April. That's a members only event. So if you're not a member yet, go to mlcircle.com and sign up. And then our next event after that is on the 22nd of April. And that's all about data. So stay tuned and we'll see you very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.